Hi, thanks so much for joining me today. This is Marla. I'm so glad that you're here. Today, I have a Making Old Things New video. I have been blogging some of these cards. I've been using older products, not buying anything new for Christmas this year. This is the Fair Isle stencil from the Greetery. I've had it for a little bit and have never used it. It's a 5-part stencil. Each of the stencil pieces has a number in the upper right-hand corner so you know which order they go in. I'm going to disregard that and start with number 2. I have a larger piece of cardstock. This was sitting on my desk. It's white accent opaque. I'm just going to use some tape to tape down my stencil because this piece of paper is a little bit larger. The edges of the stencil are not adhering to my Altenew mat, which is how I would normally keep it in place. We are going to start with the stone blue, and because these are smaller holes and I don't want to waste a lot of ink by inking up a larger brush, I'm using these smaller brushes and adding stone blue to the center. I thought I was going to add texture paste to the poinsettia, and I thought I would add the poinsettia last. But when I get to this next layer, I quickly realize that I want to add the poinsettias, even though I'm aligning my stencil in the lower left-hand corner. Sometimes things get misaligned or moved and not lined up properly. And I quickly realize with the 4 dots that are going to be in the next stencil that they go in the center of the poinsettia. And I just want to make sure that everything aligns perfectly. So I'm going to scratch the texture paste idea. My texture paste is opaque and not translucent, and so it would cover up any of the ink that I put down. And so I decided just to use this stencil as layer number 1 of texture. This stencil has a needlepoint appearance to it, which again is going to give me some faux texture on the card. Um, I could have used a larger brush. This is Rose Petal from Catherine Pooler, and I should have used a larger brush, but I didn't. And so I'm getting a really light application of this Rose Petal over the top of the poinsettias. So this needs to be re-inked. This ink pad needs to be re-inked, and I'm going to make a happy mistake. I'm going to go ahead and re-ink this, but then when I bring my brush to the ink pad, I forget to tap it off, and there's going to be a ton of ink on there. I went to the outer edge of the petals and I really liked the look. It ended up being a very happy accident. So I'm just going to go over the outer edge of each layer of the poinsettias, leaving the center a little bit lighter. I like to wipe off my stencil, or I try to, before putting it on my desk. I don't get all of the ink off. I definitely take it over to my sink and wash it afterwards, but I do get enough off to where it doesn't contaminate anything that's sitting on my desk. I'm going to show you the reveal in just a moment of these 2 layers. I forgot to show you the reveal of the poinsettias. I accidentally cut that part out. Here I'm using Spruce, which is a beautiful green. I did get a little bit of shifting because I had to move that bottom piece of tape to get to an area, and but I'm going to cut this down to 4 by 5 1/4 inches, and I'm going to adhere the panel to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch piece of forest green cardstock, so that I have a little bit like a 1/4 inch of a reveal of that forest green cardstock for a little bit of contrast. So here we are on to the next stencil. This is oh my goodness. It is a gray, and it is, I think it's called slate. I'm really bad at knowing my grays. Actually, it's called Pebble. So I ended up using this Pebble gray ink, and then I'm going to finish the last layer using clay mask. So the clay mask is going to be an orange, and you might be wondering, why would you add orange to this? I wanted to add the orange because there is going to be a carrot nose on the snowman. I like to repeat my colors when I'm creating, and even though it's a very small area of the snowman, I thought that it would be nice. This is also very small dots on this stencil, and so I thought it would be nice just to add that little hint of orange that I'm going to add to the carrot nose. So there's our background. I will again trim this down. We're going to move on to our joyful snowman. There are two different ways you can create this. One is with a wreath, one is with the snowman, and I chose to do the snowman. We're going to add additional texture to this. So first I want to ink up the top layer. I do add 3 layers for dimension of the white cardstock. You'll see that in just a minute. But I started with a light application and I ended up accidentally right there getting it a little darker than I wanted. So I went ahead and darkened up the J as well. I'll be able to lighten this up quite a bit using some water. So it's not going to be quite as dark as it is right now, but because I did get it darker on the J, I wanted to make sure that both of them, the J and the Y, were matching. I didn't want one to be much lighter than the other, so this just kind of added a little continuity. I added a little bit of that stone blue around the edge of the snowman, and here's where I'm using the nozzle of my Tim Holtz Distress Sprayer, and I'm going to go ahead and add some water. I'll use my microfiber cloth to go ahead and lift some of that ink off. And then I have this wood grain Tim Holtz 3D embossing folder. My J and Y is wet from the water, and this is going to help add a little bit more texture. It prevents the paper from cracking. I'm going to dry it with my heat tool. This is the Ranger heat tool after I ran it through my die cutting machine just to make sure that when I lifted it off the embossing folder, I didn't rip the paper at all. So here's where I'm going to add those additional layers of cardstock to give it that chipboard feel. I will link all of the products that I used in the description box below so that you can find them easily. I love adding lots of layers, lots of texture to my cards, and I'm just sharing some of the simple tricks that you can use that can add more interest when you're creating your Christmas cards. This one's a little bit more rustic, so that wood grain was perfect for the letters. You certainly could use a snow stencil, or not stencil, but embossing folder, or maybe some holly leaves, any type of texture that you would like. Repeating the colors again, I use the stone blue for the joy, and then I'm using the rose petals for the hat. I do mess up the hat a little bit. I'm like trying to figure out how this actually goes on the snowman. The mouth is a little bit more towards the top, so the hat needs to go behind the head of the snowman when you're assembling it. And I realize, I'm like, this is looking really funky. Why does this look so funky? And then I realized that I forgot to put the fur lining on it. So we'll go back and fix that. I'm going to add the little snowball to the top of it. But repeating the colors really adds a nice cohesiveness to your card. So you reusing the colors that I used on my background onto this focal point. This Joyful Snowman die cut is available in the Scrap and Cottage right now at a 50% discount. This is Cyber Monday, so I'm going to put this up on Cyber Monday. And this particular die cut is 50% off. There are some really deep cuts going on over in the Scrap and Cottage, so you might want to head over there today and see what's on sale for this Cyber Monday. There we go, adding that little fur line to the snowman, and it's going to look so much better. So I need to add a little bit more glue to the back of his head to make sure that I get this adhered nicely. And then we'll start building our snowman. I am going to use the Pebble for the scarf. I'll bring the scarf in just a moment. And then for the arms, I will add Macchiato, which is a brown. All of the inks, as I mentioned, are from Catherine Pooler. So I have a really small brush. I'm adding that Macchiato ink. And then the pebble for the scarf. And then we'll start assembling it. All right, so the scarf needs to go on first. And once I adhere the scarf, then I'll add the twig arms. And then to the end of the twig arms, I'm going to add the mittens. I will link my blog posts or my blog in the description box below. Again, I am really on this journey of trying to use some of the craft supplies that I've purchased. Christmas is one of those seasons where everything is sparkly and shiny, and you want it all. And then by the end of the season, you realize you didn't have a chance to use it. And then you get to the next season and you want to buy what's sparkly and new. And I just really wanted to go back and revisit these stamps and dies that I have purchased in years past and never got around to use. I think that it's a little bit more responsible as a crafter to try to use as much of what you have and not get sucked into buying everything. Certainly buying a few pieces is nice, but I have so much in my crafty stash that just has not been touched, that I thought that it would be a really nice challenge not to buy anything new, and I have done a great job. The only new things that I've purchased over the past couple months is I needed some additional paper. There were some great sales on some mixed media paper that I needed. And then I think that's it. I think that's all I bought. So I colored up the buttons with the W9 Copic marker that I had, and here I'm adding the Stickles. Now, Stickles is translucent glitter, and this is diamond, and so I'm just adding it over the top of the scarf to give it a lot more texture and a little bit more sparkle. And then we'll color up those holly leaves. So I bring in the spruce brush that I had used on the background. There wasn't quite enough ink on there, at least not enough to my liking. So I'm going to go ahead and just bring in the ink pad. I'll ink that up. Again, that's the spruce. And then we're going to repeat that rose petals onto the berries. And then we'll start putting some things together. I will want to add a little bit more dimension to those letters, and I'm going to do that by using a darker ink around the edges. Here I have some vellum, so you can see that I've already cut it and I've already scored it. I did not cut it with scissors. I just kind of tore the vellum, and there were some spots that I wanted to tear a little bit more. You can see that those edges, again, are going to add a little bit of rustic texture to my card. And it's also going to allow me to add some twine. So I like to add ribbon and twine to my card, and I think that this is going to be a nice landing spot for that. So I'll use my tape runner to adhere those folded areas where I scored, and I'm going to wrap this around the center of my card, and then I'll bring in some of that twine, and this is from Paper Tray Ink. I will try to link it in the description box below as well. I love it. It's one of my favorites. I think it has such a rustic charm to it. The edges of this thread are very frayed. And off camera, I'll go ahead and I'm going to loop some of that around my fingers. And then I bring in a separate piece of twine that I've cut and I just tie it in the center to give me a bow. Here's where I'm adding that additional dimension to those letters. I have that small blending brush. I'll even bring a much smaller one in because I do need to get into the deep crevices, the V of the Y and where that J kind of loops up. But I'm adding that juniper mist around the edges, and this is going to add a little bit more dimension to these pieces. And it does allow that wood grain embossing folder, that embossing that we've done, to show up a little bit more. So that's another trick to add just a little bit more 3D dimension to your letters. You can see how nice that looks. Again, that's the juniper mist. All right, so as I mentioned, I cut down my card panel. I adhered it to a piece of forest cardstock, and I'll add this to an A2 top folding card base. There's my bow. I want to make sure that that Y fits underneath. I'm trying to get the same distance between the left and the right side of my letters. So I wanted to make sure I had enough room if I put this on the very edge. I'll use my reverse tweezers to hold it in place. And I did just use that precision glue, that Nuvo glue to just add some wet glue, and those reverse tweezers, I'll keep those in place for a while to make sure that that bow adheres nicely. So again, that Y is the same distance from the right side as the J is from the left. It is tucked underneath, but you do know what this says, so it's not hindering my sentiment at all. I'm just going to glue that down with some wet glue, and then I want my snowman to pop up a little bit more. And, I could have added dimension by adding 2 or 3 layers to each of the pieces of the snowman. So I would need to add it to the mittens, to the arms, to the snowman. That was a little bit more tedious than what I wanted to do. So I'm just bringing in this really thin foam tape. It's from scrapbook.com. I will link it again in the description box below. I love it's an 1/8 inch, so it fits in onto these tiny areas such as the hat. I chose not to glue down the arms. I just left the arms free flowing. I'll remove the backing to the tape or to the foam tape, and then we'll adhere him to the center of the card. Now I am going to go ahead and add additional texture using a white gel pen. I use a Sakura. I have a number 8 and a number 10 gel pen. I also have the 5, but I don't like the 5 as well. It's too fine. I like the 8 and the 10, and I kind of go between the two. I think actually this is going to be the 10 that I'll use on this card. First, I'm going to use this button. I just purchased these off of Amazon. I love them. They're very rustic and very country. This kind of has a Nordic feel to it. If I'm to be honest, that needlepoint just gives it a little bit of that Nordic feel. First, we're going to add these hollies and berries, and I'm going to add one to the upper part of the J and then another to the bottom part of the Y. And I like the charm that those little pieces add. So just adding little bits here and there, stickles, white gel pen, um, bows, the texture from the button. It just adds a lot of detail, and it really doesn't take all that much time. So here's where I'm just kind of lifting up those arms, trying to get to the hollies and the berries that are underneath his little mitten. That will still show, that gel pen will still show. I add some lines, I add a few dots. I actually always put my finger in the stickles. I don't know why I don't add it last, but I don't. And so I will come in with off camera with the stickles and just fill in some of those spots that I smashed down with my finger. And I'm going to also add a little bit of stickles to the hat. I don't add it to the little puff ball on the end, but I do add it to the brim of the hat, and I like that look. Just adding a few more of those marks to the mittens. And here's where we're going to add that stickles. And that should complete the card. So I'm going to show you a close-up of this. I really love how this turned out. Look at all that dimension. Look at all that texture and interest. I think it's just an absolutely beautiful card. I'll link my blog post at the end of this for you to check out the other projects that I've created. I want to thank you so much for watching today. And until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.